There's a version of this story most people believe they already know. Hitler rose to power. The Jews were persecuted. There were camps. 6 million died. The war ended. Justice was served, at least partially. Move on. But that version strips away everything that makes the Holocaust not just a historical catastrophe, but a warning. It collapses 12 years of deliberate escalation into a single, blurred fact. It removes the choices, the bureaucracy, the incremental steps, the ordinary people who signed the forms, scheduled the trains, turned the locks, and looked away. It lets the machinery disappear into the smoke. What you are about to hear is different. This is the story of how it actually happened. Year by year, decision by decision, stage by calculated stage. Not a summary, not a highlight reel of horrors. A map of a process. A chronicle of how a modern, educated, civilized nation, one that had produced Goethe, Beethoven, and Einstein, chose to define an entire group of people as subhuman, strip them of every right they possessed, confine them behind walls, load them onto trains, and murder them with industrial precision. Because the Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It began with paperwork. It began with definitions. It began with a government deciding who counted as a person and who did not. And it is precisely because it began so quietly, so legally, so bureaucratically, that it is so important to understand. Not as ancient history, not as something that could only have happened there, then, to those people, by those monsters, but as a sequence of decisions that human beings made, and that human beings, under the right conditions of fear, ideology, propaganda, and silence, have made before and since. The year is 1933. The place is Germany, and the machinery is starting. 1933, the first year. Legal Revolution, January 30th, 1933. Berlin is cold. The newspapers have been printing dire warnings for months about the political instability gripping the Weimar Republic. Germany has been humiliated since 1918. Crushed by the Treaty of Versailles, stripped of territory, burdened with war reparations it cannot pay, watched as its currency collapsed so spectacularly in 1923 that workers were paid twice a day just so they could buy bread before the money became worthless again. The Great Depression hit Germany like a second catastrophe. By 1932, over 6 million Germans are unemployed, roughly a third of the working population. Families are hungry. Men stand in bread lines and suits they once wore to respectable offices. It is into this cracked and furious landscape that President Paul von Hindenburg, an 85-year-old former field marshal who privately despises Adolf Hitler and calls him the Bohemian Corporal, reluctantly appoints Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. His advisors have convinced him this is a manageable gamble. They believe Hitler can be controlled, manipulated, used as a puppet. He is the leader of the Nazi Party, they tell themselves, but the cabinet will contain sensible men, conservatives who will keep him in check. Within weeks, every one of those assumptions will prove catastrophically wrong. Hitler is 43 years old, born in Austria, failed art student, wounded in the First World War, obsessive anti-Semite. He has been telling anyone who would listen for years, in speeches, in his book Mein Kampf, in beer halls and party rallies, that Germany's problems have a single cause: the Jews, the Marxists, the Reds, the parasites eating away at Germany's racial vitality. He has said in explicit terms what he plans to do. Almost nobody takes him at his word. In the Nazi Party's newspaper, Der Stürmer, edited by the fanatical Julius Streicher, the pages are filled weekly with grotesque caricatures of hook-nosed Jewish figures preying on innocent German maidens, poisoning German wells, conspiring in smoky back rooms. In textbooks, German children are being taught to count Jewish parasites as mathematics problems. The propaganda is everywhere. It has been normalized. But it is one thing for a fringe movement to print such things, and quite another for the man who prints them to become head of government. By February 27th, less than 4 weeks after Hitler takes office, the Reichstag, Germany's parliament building, burns. The fire is blamed on a young Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lubbe. who is found on the scene. Whether he acted alone, whether the Nazis themselves set the blaze as a pretext, remains disputed by historians to this day. But what is not disputed is what happens next. Within 24 hours, Hitler uses the fire to push through the Reichstag fire decree, suspending the civil liberties guaranteed by the Weimar Constitution. Freedom of the press, gone. Freedom of assembly, gone. The right against arbitrary arrest and detention, gone. Political opponents, communists, social democrats, anyone deemed an enemy of the state, begin to be arrested immediately. The legal infrastructure for a police state is assembled in less than a day. On March 5th, elections are held. The Nazi Party wins 44% of the vote, a plurality, not a majority, even in this climate of terror and propaganda. But Hitler does not need a majority. On March 23rd, the Enabling Act passes. This is perhaps the single most consequential piece of legislation in 20th century history. It grants the German cabinet, meaning, in practice, Hitler, the authority to enact laws without the involvement of the Reichstag or President Hindenburg for the next 4 years. Germany, in a single vote, abolishes its own parliamentary democracy. The Weimar Republic ceases to exist. The Third Reich begins. And almost immediately, the laws begin to change for Germany's Jews. Before we go further, it is important to understand who the German Jews actually were in 1933. They numbered approximately 523,000 people, less than 1% of Germany's total population. They were not a foreign element. Most had been in Germany for generations, some for centuries. They had fought for Germany in the First World War. 12,000 German Jews had died in that war wearing German uniforms. They were doctors, lawyers, judges, professors, scientists, artists, businessmen, shop owners, factory workers, teachers. They were integrated. Many were highly assimilated. They spoke German, celebrated German culture. Many had intermarried. Many had converted to Christianity or no longer practiced Judaism in any meaningful sense. They were, in every practical way, German. That did not matter. Under Nazi ideology, Jewishness was not a religion. It was a racial characteristic, a biological contamination, permanent and ineradicable. It could not be washed away through baptism or marriage or service in the trenches. It was in the blood. This pseudo-scientific racism, dressed up in the language of biology, eugenics, and Darwinist theory, had been building in European intellectual circles since the mid-19th century. The Nazis did not invent anti-Semitism. They weaponized it and gave it the full force of state power. April 1st, 1933. A date that should be remembered. It is a Tuesday, an ordinary day of the week, but in Jewish communities across Germany, it arrives with a sickening weight. The Nazi government, just 61 days old, declares a national boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. SA stormtroopers, the Nazi paramilitary force, the brown shirts, are posted in front of Jewish shops and offices across the country. They stand at the doors holding signs. Germans, defend yourselves. Don't buy from Jews. The Star of David is painted on shop windows in yellow paint. Customers who approach are photographed, intimidated, sometimes physically prevented from entering. The boycott is officially one day, but the message it sends is meant to last. Jewish physicians are blocked from entering their hospitals. Jewish lawyers are turned away from courthouses. For the first time, ordinary Jewish Germans wake up and understand in their bodies, not as an abstract political worry, but as lived, physical reality, that something fundamental has shifted. They're no longer safe. The laws follow quickly. On April 7th, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service is enacted. It bars Jews and political opponents from holding civil service positions. Jewish teachers, professors, judges, state employees, thousands of people lose their jobs overnight. Many are removed mid-semester, mid-term, mid-career. Colleagues who have worked alongside them for decades are now legally required to dismiss them. Some colleagues do so with regret. Many do not. Over the next months, the restrictions multiply with breathtaking speed and thoroughness. Jews are barred from journalism and the radio. Jewish students face quotas limiting their numbers at universities. Jews are excluded from farming under new agricultural laws. Jewish authors' books are burned in public ceremonies. On May 10th, in Berlin and in university cities across Germany, students and faculty gather in torchlit squares and throw books into bonfires, while Nazi officials give speeches about cleansing German culture of Jewish influence. The books of Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, Bertolt Brecht, Heinrich Heine, into the flames. On August 2nd, President Hindenburg dies. Hitler immediately merges the offices of Chancellor and President into a single role he calls Führer, leader. The armed forces swear an oath of personal loyalty not to Germany, not to the Constitution, but to Hitler himself. Every soldier, every officer, every general in the German military is now personally bound to this man. The last institutional check on his power dissolves. And through all of this, through the boycotts and the book burnings and the firings and the escalating rhetoric, what is the reaction of the broader world? Mixed at best. In Germany itself, many non-Jewish Germans either agree with or are indifferent to the anti-Jewish measures. Propaganda has done its work. Years of strikers' newspaper, years of radio broadcasts, years of school curricula that taught children to see Jews as an alien, threatening presence. It has poisoned the well. Some Germans are horrified and say so quietly. A very few say so publicly. Most say nothing. They have their own problems. The economy is improving, slowly. Hitler is putting people back to work. The trains run on time, as the cliché goes. If the Jews are paying a price for that prosperity, well, that is a conversation for someone else to have. Outside Germany, the reaction is even more muted. The New York Times reports on the events. Some editorials express concern. The British government is cautiously watchful. There is no international intervention. There is no ultimatum. Jewish organizations in America and Britain call for boycotts of German goods. Some governments quietly tighten their immigration policies, worried about a flood of refugees. The world watches. The world says very little. By the end of 1933, Germany has been transformed. In 11 months, a democratic republic has become a one-party state. A free press has been silenced. Political opposition has been crushed. Trade unions have been disbanded. And 523,000 German Jews have been defined, in law and in propaganda, as something less than full Germans. Not yet less than full humans. That step is coming, but already less than full citizens. Already second class. Already afraid. The first concentration camp opens in March 1933. It is at Dachau, a small town near Munich. The commandant is SS Hauptsturmführer Hilmar Wackerl, replaced within months by Theodor Eicke, who turns Dachau into the model for everything that follows. In 1933, the inmates are mostly political prisoners, communists, social democrats, trade union leaders, journalists. Dachau in this early period is a place of brutal forced labor, beatings, and psychological terror, but is not yet a place of systematic mass murder. That distinction matters, and it is important to track precisely when and how it changes. For now, in late 1933, the process is still in its relatively early stages. The persecution is severe, but not yet genocidal. Jewish Germans are being pushed out of public life, out of professions, out of economic activity, and they're beginning to emigrate. About 37,000 Jews leave Germany in 1933. Destination: Palestine, the United States, France, Britain, the Netherlands. They carry what they can. They leave behind homes, businesses, graves, centuries of belonging. The ones who stay, as 1934 begins, are watching, waiting to see whether this will pass, whether Germany will come to its senses, whether the world will intervene, whether this nightmare is temporary. It is not. 1934 consolidation. 1934 is the year Hitler kills his rivals and consolidates absolute power with such ruthless finality that any remaining internal opposition within the Nazi movement itself is annihilated. By the spring of 1934, tension has been building between Hitler and the SA, the brown shirts, the paramilitary force that helped bring him to power. The SA is led by Ernst Röhm, a brutal, loyal, but increasingly inconvenient figure. Röhm commands roughly 3 million men, and he wants them incorporated into the regular German army, creating a new military structure with himself at the top. The professional German officer corps, conservative, aristocratic, deeply suspicious of Röhm and his rowdy stormtroopers, wants nothing of the kind. And Hitler, who needs the army's cooperation to rearm Germany and pursue his territorial ambitions, chooses the generals over Röhm. Between June 30th and July 2nd, 1934, in what becomes known as the Night of the Long Knives, the SS carries out coordinated arrests and murders across Germany. Röhm is shot in his prison cell. Dozens of SA leaders are killed. Political enemies are liquidated under cover of the purge, including former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher, shot in his home along with his wife. At least 85 people are murdered, though the actual number may be higher. Hitler announces that he acted to protect Germany from a coup. The Reichstag passes a law declaring the murders legal, retroactively. This is how the Third Reich operates. The law does not constrain power. It ratifies it, after the fact, with whatever justification is convenient. For German Jews, 1934 is a year of continued and deepening economic exclusion. Jews are barred from the stock exchange. Jewish actors are expelled from the Reichskammer, the state cultural chamber that controls all cultural production in Germany. To work in any area of German cultural life, film, theater, music, publishing, fine arts, you must be a member of the chamber. Jews are expelled. Their work disappears from German culture. The sterilization law passed in July 1933, the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, begins to be implemented with full force in 1934. Mandatory sterilization for people with conditions deemed hereditary, schizophrenia, epilepsy, hereditary blindness, hereditary deafness, severe alcoholism, and others. By the end of the Nazi period, somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 people will be forcibly sterilized under this law. This program is not specifically anti-Semitic in its origins. It targets disabled Germans of all backgrounds, but it establishes crucial precedents. The idea that the state has the right to control reproduction, to determine who is worthy of having children, to prioritize the racial health of the nation over individual rights. These ideas, practiced and normalized on German soil in 1934, will be weaponized against Jews in the years that follow. When Hindenburg dies in August 1934 and Hitler formally combines the offices of Chancellor and President, there is no longer any legal or institutional framework that can challenge him. Germany is now, fully and finally, a dictatorship. 1935. The Nuremberg Laws, defining the Jew. September 1935. The city of Nuremberg in Bavaria, already designated as the ceremonial spiritual capital of the Nazi Reich, hosts the annual party congress. These rallies are magnificent, terrifying spectacles. Hundreds of thousands of uniformed party members assembled in geometric formations, lit by searchlights, surrounded by swastika banners hundreds of feet tall, accompanied by martial music and Hitler's hypnotic speeches. They are designed to intoxicate, to create the sensation of being part of something vast and inevitable. Albert Speer, the architect who designs the staging, will later compare the atmosphere to a cathedral made of light. At this particular rally, on September 15th, a special session of the Reichstag is convened, the only one ever held outside Berlin during the entire Nazi period. 2 laws are passed unanimously. Together, they will be known as the Nuremberg Laws, and they will provide the legal framework for everything that follows. The first is the Reich Citizenship Law. It defines citizenship not by birth or residence or loyalty, but by blood. Only a person of German or related blood can be a citizen of Germany with full political rights. Jews, defined as a racial category, are stripped of citizenship. They are no longer citizens. They are state subjects, residents of Germany without the rights of citizenship. They cannot vote. They cannot hold public office. They have no political representation whatsoever. The second is the law for the protection of German blood and German honor. It prohibits marriages between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. It criminalizes sexual relations between them, what the Nazis call Rassenschande, race defilement. It forbids Jewish households from employing German women under the age of 45 as domestic servants. It bars Jews from flying the German national flag. The definitional work, the bureaucratic task of determining precisely who counts as Jewish, is not completed on the day of the laws. The supplementary decree published on November 14, 1935 settles it. A person is defined as a Jew if they have at least 3 grandparents who are members of the Jewish religious community. 2 Jewish grandparents makes you a Mischling, a person of mixed blood, subject to varying degrees of discrimination depending on which category of Mischling you fall into. These charts, these genealogical diagrams with shaded circles and squares and lines of descent, are distributed widely in Germany. Teachers display them in classrooms. They are the visual grammar of racial categorization. Think about what this means in practice. A German family that has not practiced Judaism in 3 generations, a family that may have converted to Christianity in 1880, a family that considers itself entirely German. If they have Jewish grandparents, the Nazi state now classifies their children as Jews. Religion is irrelevant. Culture is irrelevant. Identity is irrelevant. What matters is blood. What matters is ancestry. What matters is race, as the Nazis have defined and invented it. And the Nazis themselves know, though they would never admit publicly, that the racial categories they are creating have no scientific basis. There is no blood test, no physical examination, no genetic analysis that can distinguish a Jewish person from a non-Jewish one. The definitional work has to fall back, in the end, on religious practice, on whether grandparents were members of the Jewish community. It is, as historian Thomas Childers observes, a purely constructed racial category dressed in scientific language. It is a fiction, but a fiction backed by the full force of German law and the German state. The immediate practical consequences are devastating and intimate. Couples who have been together for years, a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman, for instance, or the reverse, are now criminals if they continue their relationship. Some couples desperately marry before the law takes full effect. Others separate, sometimes after decades. Families where one member is Jewish and another is not are torn apart by legal definitions they had no part in creating. Children ask their parents whether they are Jewish. Parents struggle to explain what the question means when it has never meant anything before. Beyond relationships, the laws accelerate economic exclusion. If you are now legally a Jew rather than a German citizen, the cascade of discriminatory measures becomes even more binding. Jews are increasingly barred from the professions, from economic activity, from public life. Jewish doctors cannot treat non-Jewish patients in publicly funded hospitals. Jewish lawyers cannot represent non-Jewish clients in German courts. The architecture of exclusion grows more elaborate and more airtight with each passing month. And still the world watches. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, which opened in August, Germany presents a carefully managed spectacle to the world. The most virulent anti-Semitic signs are temporarily removed from some Berlin streets. Der Stürmer's most offensive issues are pulled from newsstands in the city. Germany wants to show the world a confident, modern, civilized nation. Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals, which Hitler is said to have found infuriating, though historians debate the extent to which he actually snubbed Owens directly. The propaganda effort is largely successful. International visitors go home impressed. Sports reporters write about Germany's modern facilities and efficient organization. The machinery of persecution is briefly concealed behind an Olympic flame. By the end of 1935 and through 1936, approximately 160,000 Jews have emigrated from Germany. The ones who stay are increasingly desperate and increasingly trapped. Their assets are being confiscated. Their businesses are being forced to sell at far below market value in a process called Aryanization, and the doors to other countries are slowly closing. The United States has strict immigration quotas. Britain is cautious. Palestine, under British mandate, has restrictions on Jewish immigration. The world is, in effect, locking the Jews in. 1936 to 1937. Normalizing the abnormal. The years 1936 and 1937 do not contain a single dramatic legislative rupture comparable to the Nuremberg laws. What they contain instead is something perhaps more insidious: the deepening normalization of systematic persecution. The laws are in place. Now the bureaucratic apparatus works, month by month, to extend them, refine them, apply them to every corner of German life. Jews are progressively barred from parks, swimming pools, public libraries, certain restaurants, certain streets. Yellow benches appear in parks, marked "for Jews only," as the rest of the benches become implicitly or explicitly off-limits. Signs reading "Jews not welcome" appear in shop windows, above town entrances, outside restaurants. Some are official, many are voluntary. The social pressure to exclude, to signal one's conformity with the regime's racial ideology, is intense and pervasive. The Sachsenhausen concentration camp opens near Berlin in 1936. Buchenwald opens near Weimar in 1937. These camps are not yet the extermination factories of the later years. They are brutal forced labor camps, places of systematic degradation, hunger, beatings, and death by exhaustion or arbitrary murder. But they are growing, and they are filling, and the principle they embody, that certain categories of people can be detained indefinitely without trial, without charge, without legal recourse, is becoming an accepted feature of German life. What about ordinary Germans? What were they thinking during these years? Historians have wrestled with this question for decades. Robert Gellatley's research and Christopher Browning's and Daniel Goldhagen's, they offer different emphases, different interpretations. But what emerges from the evidence is a complex picture. Some Germans actively support the persecution. Some are indifferent. Some are privately troubled, but publicly silent. A very few, a small and courageous minority, resist in small ways, hiding Jewish neighbors, refusing to participate in boycotts, maintaining friendships across the racial divide. The Gestapo, the secret state police, is astonishingly small by modern estimates, somewhere around 30,000 to 40,000 officers for a country of 70 million people. It works largely not through omnipresent surveillance, but through denunciations, ordinary Germans reporting their neighbors, colleagues, and even family members to the authorities. The Gestapo's files overflow with letters from Germans informing on other Germans. A woman reports her Jewish neighbor for listening to a foreign radio station. A man reports his business partner for making remarks critical of the government. Children report their parents. The social fabric itself becomes a surveillance mechanism. People police each other. The terror works not only through direct violence, but through the constant possibility of denunciation, the awareness that anyone might be watching. For Jewish Germans, the psychological weight of these years is immense. Children are expelled from German schools and placed in separate Jewish schools. Adults navigate an increasingly narrow and treacherous social world. Every public outing involves calculations. Which streets are safe? Which shops will serve them? What to say and not say if stopped by police or accosted by hostile strangers? The word hostile strangers is almost too mild. Jewish women report being spat on in the street. Jewish men report arbitrary beatings. Jewish businesses are vandalized. And all of this violence, this exclusion, this terror, takes place within a framework of legality. The state has decided they deserve it. The courts will not help them. The police may well be the ones doing it. And still, in 1936 and 1937, most German Jews have not left. They are waiting, hoping, calculating that this is the worst of it, that it cannot get worse, that the international community will pressure Germany to moderate, that the German economy's dependence on Jewish professionals and business people will force a reversal. They are wrong on every count. The immigration numbers tell the story. By the end of 1937, approximately 130,000 Jews have left Germany out of the original 523,000. Nearly 400,000 remain. They are running out of places to go, money to take with them, and time. 1938. The year everything breaks. 1938 is when the quiet escalation stops being quiet. It is the year of dramatic territorial expansion, of an internationally significant conference that fails catastrophically, of the first mass arrests based solely on Jewishness, and, most shatteringly, of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. The night that historian Martin Gilbert called the most widely reported act of anti-Semitic violence in German history to that point, and the night that demonstrated to any remaining optimist that there was no floor below which the Nazi regime would not go. But before Kristallnacht, there is the Anschluss. On March 12, 1938, German troops march into Austria. The next day, Hitler announces the annexation of Austria into the German Reich. The crowd in Vienna, and in many Austrian cities and towns, greets the arrival of German forces with extraordinary enthusiasm, with cheering crowds, with Nazi salutes and flowers thrown from balconies. Austria, which has had its own deeply rooted anti-Semitic movements for decades, embraces the Nazi Reich with enthusiasm that sometimes exceeds even Germany's own. For Austria's approximately 185,000 Jews, the Anschluss is catastrophic. In Germany, the persecution had taken 5 years to reach the level of social exclusion and economic suffocation that Austrian Jews experience in a matter of weeks. The pattern is compressed, accelerated. Jewish Viennese are dragged into the streets by jeering crowds and forced to scrub pavements with toothbrushes while Nazi officials and spectators watch and laugh. Jewish businesses are immediately seized. Jews are arrested in large numbers. The suicide rate in Vienna's Jewish community spikes dramatically in the weeks following the Anschluss. At least 500 Viennese Jews take their own lives in the immediate aftermath. The young Adolf Eichmann is dispatched to Vienna to oversee what the Nazis call the voluntary immigration of Austria's Jews. In practice, a process by which Jews are stripped of their assets, forced to pay fees and sign documents, and then allowed to leave with almost nothing. Eichmann develops a systematic approach to this process, creating a one-stop office where Jews can be processed, stripped, and expelled in a single bureaucratic transaction. It is, in its horrible way, a model of administrative efficiency. It makes him a rising star in the SS. It will ultimately make him one of the architects of genocide. In July 1938, 32 nations gather at a lakeside resort in Evian, France, to discuss the Jewish refugee crisis. President Franklin Roosevelt convenes the conference, but makes clear in advance that the United States will not raise its immigration quotas. Britain will not open Palestine to Jewish immigration. And nation after nation, speaking through polished diplomats in comfortable conference rooms, explains why it cannot accept Jewish refugees. Australia, as we have no real racial problem, we are not desirous of importing one. Canada, a door barely ajar. Latin American countries, mostly closed. The Dominican Republic is the only country to make a significant offer. It will accept up to 100,000 Jewish refugees. In the end, very few arrive. The Evian Conference is a disaster. Not only does it fail to help the Jews of Europe, it signals clearly to the Nazi regime that the world has no serious intention of intervening. If 32 nations cannot agree to accept a few 100,000 refugees, they will certainly not intervene militarily or diplomatically to stop what is happening inside Germany. Hitler reads the conference results correctly. The world does not care enough about Jews to act. The persecution can continue, can deepen, without international consequence. It deepens almost immediately. On October 28, 1938, 17,000 Jews of Polish citizenship, many of whom have lived in Germany for decades, some for their entire lives, with no meaningful connection to Poland, are arrested in the middle of the night. They are given no warning, no time to collect belongings beyond what they can carry. They are herded into trains and deposited at the Polish border at ZBZ, in a no-man's land between Germany and Poland. Poland refuses to readmit them. Germany refuses to take them back. They spend weeks in makeshift camps in horrific conditions, in early winter cold, without adequate shelter, food, or sanitation. Among those deported is the Greenspan family. Their 17-year-old son Herschel is living in Paris on a student visa when he hears what has happened to his parents. He goes to the German embassy in Paris on November 7th and asks to speak to an official about the deportation of his family. He is shown into the office of a third secretary named Ernst von Rath. Herschel Greenspan pulls out a pistol and shoots him. Von Rath dies 2 days later. When the news of von Rath's death reaches Hitler on the evening of November 9th, a symbolically charged date for the Nazis, the anniversary of the failed beer hall putsch, he is in Munich, celebrating with the old guard of the Nazi movement. Joseph Goebbels approaches him. They speak privately. Hitler nods. Goebbels takes the stage and delivers a speech that is both an incitement and a permission slip. The German people's anger, he says, has been understandably aroused by this Jewish assassination. The party should not appear to have organized what is about to happen. But if it happens, it should happen. Telephone orders go out from Munich across Germany within the hour. SA leaders, SS officers, local Nazi party officials receive the signal. And across Germany, and in the annexed territories of Austria and the Sudetenland, the violence begins. The night of November 9th into November 10th, 1938. Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. The name comes from the shards that litter the streets of German cities the next morning. The glittering fragments of broken glass from the windows of thousands of Jewish shops, homes, and synagogues. More than 1,400 synagogues are burned or severely damaged. Roughly 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses are destroyed or looted. Jewish homes are invaded. Furniture is hurled into the streets. Books are ripped apart. Toys, dishes, clothing, family photographs. Everything is smashed or stolen or destroyed. Jewish cemeteries are desecrated. Jewish schools and hospitals and community centers are attacked. The violence against people is equally brutal. Nazi mobs bludgeon Jewish men in the streets. Women are assaulted. Children watch their parents beaten. Early official figures report 91 Jews killed during the pogrom. More careful modern analysis suggests the actual number, including suicides and deaths in custody in the immediate aftermath, runs into the hundreds, possibly over 1,000. Approximately 30,000 Jewish men between the ages of 16 and 60, are arrested in the days following Kristallnacht and transported to the concentration camps at Dachau, Buchenwald, and Sachsenhausen. In the weeks after their arrival, the death rates in these camps spike dramatically. Here's one of the things that makes Kristallnacht so significant, beyond its sheer violence. The firefighters stand by and watch the synagogues burn. They intervene only when flames threaten adjacent non-Jewish property. The police watch the mobs attack Jewish businesses and homes. Some police participate. Courts don't prosecute the perpetrators. The Gestapo has ordered that no charges be brought. And then, in a detail of breathtaking cynicism, the Nazi government issues an order that the Jewish community must pay for the damages. A collective fine of 1 billion Reichsmarks, assessed against the victims of the pogrom for the destruction carried out against them. The German insurance companies, which would have paid out on the Jewish businesses' policies, are instructed to pay the Reich instead of the policyholders. It should be noted who is watching all of this. American Ambassador Hugh Wilson is in Berlin and sends detailed dispatches to Washington. Diplomats from across the world are watching. 4 journalists are filing reports. The New York Times runs detailed front-page coverage. The Times of London calls it one of the most shameful episodes in modern German history. And yet, no government breaks diplomatic relations with Germany over Kristallnacht. No government imposes sanctions. No government takes military action. The world responds with expressions of outrage and does essentially nothing that matters. In Germany, some non-Jewish Germans are genuinely horrified by Kristallnacht. A psychologist named Michael Muller-Claudius interviews 41 randomly selected Nazi party members in its aftermath and finds that 26 of them expressed disgust at what has happened. But disgust, privately felt, does not translate into resistance. There is no significant public protest from within Germany. The church hierarchies are largely silent. The military is silent. The business community calculates its interests. And the silence enables the next stage. By the end of 1938, being a Jew in Germany has become nearly untenable. The Aryanization of Jewish-owned businesses, the forced transfer of Jewish-owned enterprises to non-Jewish Germans at a fraction of their real value, has been accelerating all year and reaches a decisive phase after Kristallnacht. Jews are banned from attending German schools and universities. They are barred from cinemas, theaters, and concerts. They are banned from public parks and beaches in many cities. Their driving licenses are revoked. Their radios are confiscated. Their passports must be stamped with a large J to identify them as Jews. Those whose names don't appear sufficiently Jewish are required by law to add Israel to men's names and Sarah to women's names for identification purposes. Immigration is now happening faster than ever. Approximately 78,000 Jews leave Germany in 1938 alone. But where are they going? The doors are closing. The United States maintains its quota system. Britain has tightened immigration to Palestine. The Mississippi St. Louis sails from Hamburg in May 1939, carrying 937 Jewish refugees, most of them German, and is turned away from Havana, Cuba, then turned away from the United States coast, then returns to Europe. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Britain divide the passengers between them. Many of those who end up in Belgium and the Netherlands will later die in the camps when Germany invades those countries. The story of the St. Louis is often cited as an example of international indifference. It should be cited as something more specific, as a case study in the deadly interaction between Nazi persecution and closed borders. The Nazis were, in 1938, still primarily interested in expulsion, not extermination. They wanted the Jews out of Germany. But there was nowhere for the Jews to go. The world's immigration policies were making the Jews of Germany into trapped animals. And as the doors closed, the Nazis were already beginning to think about what to do with a population that could not be expelled. 1939, the war begins, and the ghetto walls rise September 1st, 1939. At 4:45 in the morning, German troops pour across the border into Poland. The Second World War begins. For the Jews of Europe, this is not merely the beginning of a war. It is the event that transforms persecution into something categorically different. Because in Poland live approximately 3 million Jews, the largest Jewish community in Europe, roughly 10 times the remaining Jewish population of Germany itself. And now they are under German control. But we need to back up slightly. In March 1939, Hitler had already violated the Munich Agreement he had signed with Britain and France the previous September and occupied the remainder of Czechoslovakia, creating the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia and a puppet Slovak state. Europe had been watching this and doing nothing. The policy of appeasement, championed by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, was in tatters. By this point, everyone with eyes to see understood that Hitler's appetite could not be appeased. But the war had not yet started. The Hitler-Stalin Pact of August 23rd, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact, stuns the world. Germany and the Soviet Union, ideologically mortal enemies, have agreed not to attack each other and have secretly divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. The eastern half of Poland will fall to the Soviets. This agreement clears the path for the invasion of Poland, knowing that the Soviet Union will not intervene. Britain and France have guaranteed Poland's territorial integrity, and they do declare war on Germany 2 days after the invasion. But they do not move quickly enough to help Poland. Within 6 weeks, Poland is crushed from both sides, Germany from the west, the Soviet Union from the east. In the immediate chaos of the German conquest of Western Poland, something terrible happens to Polish Jews. The Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units of the SS and police, follow the German army into Poland, as they will later follow it into the Soviet Union. In these first weeks of the Polish campaign, they are primarily targeting Polish intellectuals, clergy, professionals, and community leaders, anyone who might organize resistance. But Jews, as the most despised category in Nazi racial ideology, face particular violence. Synagogues are burned. Jewish men are rounded up and shot. Jewish communities are subjected to spontaneous pogroms, some organized by the Einsatzgruppen, some carried out by local Polish anti-Semites, taking advantage of the chaos of conquest. The territory conquered from Poland is divided. Some areas are incorporated directly into Germany, the western regions, including the Warthegau, where the Lodz ghetto will soon be established. The rest, including Warsaw, Krakow, and Lublin, is designated as the general government, an occupied territory administered by Hans Frank, a lawyer, an early Nazi, who will oversee some of the worst atrocities of the entire war. Frank's stated goal is to destroy Poland's identity and culture. His approach to Polish Jews is exterminatory from the start. The T4 program begins in the autumn of 1939. This needs careful attention because it is the direct ancestor of the Holocaust killing technology. Adolf Hitler signs a secret authorization, backdated to September 1st, 1939, to tie it symbolically to the war, granting physicians the authority to provide merciful deaths to those considered incurably ill. In practice, this means the systematic murder of disabled Germans. Those with schizophrenia, epilepsy, hereditary blindness, hereditary deafness, severe physical disabilities, and other conditions the Nazis define as genetically compromising Germany's racial health. The program operates through 6 killing centers: Bernburg, Brandenburg, Grafenegg, Hadamar, Hartheim, and Sonnenstein. Patients are selected by questionnaires, transferred to these facilities, and killed, initially by starvation and lethal injection, then by carbon monoxide gas in chambers disguised as shower rooms. Death certificates are falsified. Families receive letters informing them that their loved one has died of pneumonia or heart failure. Urns of ashes are sent, sometimes several urns from the same facility, to different families on the same day, which arouses suspicion. Some German physicians refuse to participate. Some protest. The Catholic Bishop of Münster, Clemens von Galen, will deliver a famous public sermon condemning the program in 1941 that contributes to its official suspension. By the time T4 is officially halted in August 1941, somewhere between 70,000 and 200,000 people have been murdered. The uncertainty in the numbers reflects how thoroughly records were falsified. But the program leaves behind something even more consequential than its immediate victims. It leaves behind a trained cadre of gas chamber operators and administrators. It leaves behind the knowledge that mass murder by gas can be carried out systematically, efficiently, and, until the bishop's sermon, secretly. It leaves behind men like Christian Worth, who ran the Brandenburg Killing Center and will go on to design and operate Belzec, the first extermination camp for Jews. The T4 program is not a footnote to the Holocaust. It is a prototype. Meanwhile, in occupied Poland, the first ghettos are being established. In October 1940, the Warsaw Ghetto is created, a walled enclosure in the old Jewish quarter of Poland's capital, into which all of Warsaw's Jewish population is to be relocated. On November 15, 1940, the gates close, sealed behind 11 miles of brick wall, 10 feet high. Topped in places with broken glass and barbed wire, are approximately 380,000 Jews from Warsaw itself, soon swelled by further deportations from surrounding areas, to something approaching 460,000 people at its peak in April 1941. The statistics of the Warsaw Ghetto are staggering. At its peak, roughly 30% of Warsaw's total population is confined to 2.4% of the city's area. The density is approximately 146,000 people per square kilometer. 8 to 10 people per room is the average. Not the worst case, but the average. The Germans set the official food ration for Jews at approximately 184 calories per day in 1941. A normal human being requires roughly 2,000 calories to maintain basic health. The Nazis, in an official order dated April 19, 1941, actually state explicitly that the basic provisioning of the Jewish residential district must be less than the minimum necessary for preserving life. regardless of the consequences. This is not negligence. This is murder at one remove. It is slower than a bullet, less efficient than gas, but it is killing by design. Between 1940 and mid-1942, approximately 83,000 to 92,000 Jews die in a Warsaw ghetto from starvation and disease, primarily typhus, which flourishes in conditions of extreme overcrowding and malnutrition. By August 1941, more than 5,000 people are dying in the ghetto every single month. Men and women, too weakened to move, sit or lie on the pavements and die where they have collapsed. Children beg for food in the streets. Corpses are covered with newspapers and left for collection. And yet, this is crucial. The ghetto does not simply collapse into horror. Within the walls, the Jewish community attempts to maintain something like civilized life. Underground schools operate, teaching children who are legally barred from education. A symphony orchestra performs. Cafes and restaurants serve those who can afford them. A secret archive called the Oneg Shabbat, meaning joy of the Sabbath, is organized by the historian Emanuel Ringelblum, who recruits a team of writers, scholars, and ordinary people to document ghetto life, to record what is happening, to preserve testimony, to ensure that the truth of what they are living through will survive even if they do not. They bury their records in metal canisters and milk cans beneath the ghetto floor. After the war, parts of the archive are recovered from the ruins. Not all. The Lodz ghetto is established even earlier, in February 1940, in the industrial city the Nazis renamed Litzmannstadt. Lodz's ghetto becomes something different from Warsaw's, under the leadership of the controversial Chaim Rumkowski, who governs it in an authoritarian style that makes him one of the most debated figures in Holocaust historiography. The Lodz ghetto becomes a massive forced labor operation, producing goods for the German war economy. Rumkowski's bet is that productivity will make the ghetto's residents too valuable to kill. In the short term, he is partially right. In the long term, he is catastrophically wrong. But for now, in 1940, the ghetto works. The machines run, and Rumkowski persuades himself that he is saving lives. There are over 400 ghettos established in Nazi-occupied Poland and Eastern Europe. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's research identifies at least 1,143 in the occupied Eastern territories alone. Most are much smaller than Warsaw or Lodz. Some last only weeks before their populations are deported to death camps. Others persist for years. But all of them share the essential structure. Jews stripped of property and freedom, enclosed behind walls or fences, subject to German administrative control, living on starvation rations, dying by the thousands from disease and hunger, waiting. Waiting for what exactly? That is the question that haunts this period. The people in the ghettos know that something terrible is happening and that it is getting worse. But the full machinery of industrialized extermination has not yet been built. It is 1939, 1940. The death camps do not yet exist. The gas chambers have not yet been installed. Mass shootings are happening in Poland. Thousands of Polish Jews are killed by Einsatzgruppen and SS units in the immediate wake of the invasion. But the systematic, continental-scale genocide of the Holocaust has not yet begun. That begins in 1941. 1940, the net closes. Occupied Europe and trapped millions by 1940. Nazi Germany controls, or shortly will control, most of continental Western Europe. Denmark and Norway fall in April. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg fall in May. France, the great power of Western Europe, falls in June. Shockingly quickly, Italy joins the war on Germany's side. Britain stands alone, refusing to negotiate terms. The geography of the Holocaust victims is being determined by the geography of German conquest. Every country that falls under Nazi control brings its Jewish population under Nazi persecution. The Netherlands has approximately 140,000 Jews. Belgium has approximately 65,000. France has approximately 300,000, a combination of long-established French Jews and Jewish refugees from Germany and Eastern Europe. Denmark has approximately 7,000 Jews. a small community that will later become famous for a remarkable act of national solidarity. In the occupied and collaborating countries of Western Europe, the process of persecution largely mirrors what happened in Germany in 1933 to 1938, but compressed into months rather than years. In the Netherlands, the German occupation administration immediately begins implementing anti-Jewish measures. Jews are registered. Jewish businesses are seized. Jews are barred from public life. In France, the Vichy government, the French administration that collaborates with Germany in the unoccupied south of France, implements its own anti-Semitic legislation without even being asked to by the Germans. The Vichy regime's anti-Semitism is not simply an import from Germany. It is homegrown, rooted in French political culture, and it makes the French administration a willing participant in what follows. In 1940, the Madagascar Plan briefly floats through Nazi policy discussions. The idea, seriously entertained, actually drafted into a formal proposal by Franz Rademacher of the German Foreign Ministry, is to deport the entire Jewish population of Europe to the island of Madagascar, off the east coast of Africa. The 4 million Jews would be settled there under SS supervision, in what would be essentially a vast open-air prison. The proposal assumes German naval dominance, which does not materialize after the Battle of Britain prevents Germany from completing its conquest of Western Europe. Britain's continued resistance means Germany cannot control the sea lanes needed for such deportation. Madagascar remains a fantasy, but the Madagascar Plan is significant because it tells us something important about Nazi intentions at this stage. In 1940, the preferred solution is still expulsion, getting rid of the Jews, shipping them somewhere far away, out of Europe. The transition from expulsion to annihilation has not yet been made, or at least has not yet been operationalized. That transition comes in 1941, with the invasion of the Soviet Union and the decisions that follow from it. What 1940 also brings, in Germany's occupied territories, is a more systematic looting and dispossession of Jewish property. In Poland, Jews are compelled to hand over their businesses, their bank accounts, their jewelry, their silver, their valuables, their furniture. What cannot be seized immediately is confiscated incrementally through regulations requiring declaration and surrender. Jews are being impoverished with systematic thoroughness. The economic motive in anti-Semitic persecution is rarely given its full weight. The wealth of Jewish Europeans, accumulated over generations, is being transferred to the Nazi state, to German business interests, and to individual Germans. The houses of deported Jews are distributed to ethnic Germans resettled from Eastern Europe in a vast demographic project. The Aryanization of Jewish property is not simply persecution. It is theft on a continental scale, carried out with legal imprimatur. And the children. One cannot write about 1939 and 1940 without accounting for the children. The Jewish children of Germany, who had been expelled from German schools, now educated in Jewish schools that barely function. The children of the Warsaw Ghetto, 85,000 of them at the peak, for whom a normal childhood has been annihilated, who play in rubble, who beg, who watch siblings and parents waste away, who understand in their bones that the world considers their lives expendable. Emanuel Ringelblum and others in the ghetto collected testimonies from these children. Read what you can of them. They are almost unbearable. One child, one of the millions, Amos Steinberg, 4 years old in the summer of 1942. His family, his mother Ida, his father Ludwig, are in their Scienstadt, the model ghetto in Bohemia that the Nazis used for propaganda purposes, to show the Red Cross and international observers that Jewish life under German administration is orderly and humane. Inside the walls of their Scienstadt, which is both a ghetto and a transit camp, thousands of elderly and educated German and Austrian Jews are held. Cultural life continues. Concerts are performed, but the trains leave regularly for the east. In October 1944, Amos and his mother arrive at Auschwitz. He is 6 years old. The Auschwitz Museum has his shoe, a small child's booty, with the number 541, his transport number from their Scienstadt, written inside by his mother. She tied the shoes together carefully, wrote his number in both, so they wouldn't be separated. So he could find them after the disinfection, she told him. They never came back. Amos and his mother went to the gas chamber. Ludwig survived, was transferred to Dachau, survived the war, remarried, emigrated to Israel. He testified to Yad Vashem in 1955, certifying Amos and Ida as Holocaust victims. The shoe outlasted him. It outlasts all of them. It sits today in the collection of the Auschwitz Museum, one of the most eloquent objects in the world. 1941, the point of no return, June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa begins. Germany launches the largest military invasion in human history. Somewhere between 3 and 4 million soldiers crossed the Soviet border on a front stretching roughly 2,900 kilometers from the Arctic Ocean to the Black Sea. Hundreds of thousands of tanks, aircraft, artillery pieces, and support vehicles pour into Soviet territory. The initial German advance is staggering in its speed and success. Soviet forces, caught unprepared despite intelligence warnings that are ignored by Stalin, collapse in vast pockets of encirclement. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers are captured in the first weeks. By autumn, the Wehrmacht is approaching Moscow, Leningrad is under siege, and Kiev has fallen. For the Jews of the Soviet Union, approximately 3 million people living in the territories that Germany now occupies or soon will, Operation Barbarossa is not a military event. It is a death sentence. Because following the Wehrmacht across the Soviet border are the Einsatzgruppen, for mobile killing units, A, B, C, and D, totaling approximately 3,000 trained killers supported by order police battalions, Waffen-SS units, and local auxiliary forces. Their mission, as stated in their operational orders, is the elimination of Jews in state and party positions. But in practice, almost from the first days of the invasion, this expands into something far more total. The murder of entire Jewish communities, regardless of age, sex, or any other factor. The killing begins immediately. In the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Einsatzgruppen are sometimes preceded and sometimes assisted by local nationalist groups who carry out their own pogroms even before the Germans arrive, or with minimal German encouragement. Lithuania is particularly brutal. Within the first months of German occupation, approximately 80% of Lithuanian Jews are murdered, a higher proportion than almost any other occupied country. Nearly all of the approximately 200,000 Jews of Lithuania are killed by the end of 1941. The pattern in every occupied community is the same. The Germans arrive. Orders are posted requiring the Jewish population to register, to assemble at a certain time and place, to bring identity documents and warm clothing. The pretext varies. Sometimes it is resettlement, sometimes labor registration, sometimes something more vague. But the destination is always the same: a ravine, a forest, a field outside the town. Pits are dug in advance, or the victims are forced to dig them. The Jews are marched out of the town, sometimes in family groups, sometimes separated by sex. They are ordered to undress and leave their valuables. They walk to the edge of the pit. They are shot. The killing is carried out at close range: rifles, pistols, occasionally machine guns. The shooters are frequently within a few meters of their victims. They are looking into their faces. The scale is almost incomprehensible. At Ponary, outside Vilnius in Lithuania, between 70,000 and 100,000 people are murdered in a series of pits. At the 9th Fort outside Kaunas, at least 30,000. At Rumbula Forest near Riga, Latvia, approximately 38,000 Jews are shot over 2 days at the end of November and beginning of December 1941. And then Babi Yar. On September 19, 1941, the Germans capture Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. In the days that follow, explosions, bombs planted by Soviet agents before the evacuation, rock the city, killing German soldiers and Ukrainians. The Germans blame the Jews. On September 26th, German authorities decide to murder all the Jews of Kiev. Notices are posted across the city. All Jews of Kiev and surrounding area are required to appear on Monday, September 29th, by 8 o'clock in the morning at the corner of Melnik and Dekaruska streets. Bring documents, money, valuables, warm clothing, and linen. Failure to comply will be punished by death. The notices specify the meeting point near the Jewish cemetery. The language gives no clear indication of what will follow. Many Kiev Jews assume they are being deported eastward, relocated to labor camps. Some are suspicious, but come because failure to comply means death. Some are terrified, but can see no alternative. And some simply cannot believe that the actual reality of what the Germans are about to do, is what the whispers suggest. Nobody could actually do this. On the morning of September 29th, Jewish families make their way toward Babi Yar, the ravine on the northern edge of the city where the Jewish cemetery is located. There are enormous crowds. Children are carried on shoulders. Old men walk with canes. Women carry bundles of clothing. As they enter the area of the cemetery, a Ukrainian truck driver later recounts seeing what happened. The crowd is channeled through a narrowing series of checkpoints. At each one, they're ordered to leave luggage, then coats, then shoes, then outer clothing. By the time they reach the ravine's edge, most are in their underwear or less. They are driven by police and guards to the edge of the ravine. Below them are bodies. The shooting has already been going on for hours. A member of the SS squad later testifies, "I saw that the whole ravine was already full of bodies. The people were shot by walking along the rows and being shot in the neck. The marksman would walk across the bodies to the next Jew, who had meanwhile lain down, and shoot him." In 2 days, September 29th and 30th, 1941, 33,771 Jews are murdered at Babi Yar. 33,771 human beings, men and women, elderly people who cannot walk without help, children who cannot yet walk at all, killed in 2 days by a few hundred men with guns. The scale is such that the mind simply slides off it. Try to hold it. 33,771 people in 2 days. The number is precise because the Einsatzgruppen filed detailed operational reports to Berlin, accounting for their work as if they were filling out invoices. Babi Yar does not end on September 30th. Over the following 2 years of German occupation, tens of thousands more are murdered there. Soviet prisoners of war, Ukrainian civilians accused of resistance, Roma, the mentally ill from the Pavlov psychiatric hospital. The total number of people murdered at Babi Yar over the course of the occupation is estimated between 100,000 and 150,000. But Babi Yar is the symbol. It is the moment, if a single moment can be identified, when the Holocaust by bullets becomes undeniable in its scale and intention. And it is happening everywhere simultaneously, across thousands of kilometers of occupied Soviet territory. By the end of 1941, more than 1 million Jews have been murdered in the Soviet territories alone. The Holocaust by bullets, as Father Patrick Dubois, who spent decades investigating these killing sites with forensic teams, named it, claims approximately 1.5 to 2 million lives in mass shootings. This is a death toll that is barely discussed in most accounts of the Holocaust, which focus on the camps. It is 1/3 of the total 6 million. It is Jews shot beside pits and forests, in ravines, in fields, by men who looked at them and pulled the trigger. The Einsatzgruppen commanders write home to their superiors. They file reports with meticulous statistics. They note the psychological toll on their own men, cases of alcoholism, nervous breakdowns, suicides among the shooters. Himmler visits an execution near Minsk in August 1941. He watches the process, sees blood and brain matter spatter, and is reportedly shaken. He asks Otto Ohlendorf, one of the Einsatzgruppen commanders, whether there is a more humane method. Humane, that is, for the perpetrators. For the men who have to do the shooting, not for those being shot. This concern for the shooter's mental health, this dark, grotesque inversion of humane values, leads directly to the gas vans and eventually to the gas chambers. The problem the SS leadership is trying to solve is not, how do we reduce the suffering of our victims? It is, How do we make mass murder more efficient and less psychologically damaging for our killers? The answer they develop is industrialized, mechanized, impersonal death. The killer does not need to look into the eyes of the person he is killing. He pours pellets through a vent in the roof. He starts a motor. He does not have to watch. He is, as Hannah Arendt would later observe, merely following a routine, doing his job, a small cog in a vast administrative machine. The first gas vans begin operating at Chelmno, in occupied Poland, in December 1941. They are trucks modified to pipe their exhaust into a sealed compartment in the back. The victims, primarily Jews from the Lodz ghetto and surrounding areas, are loaded into the back of the truck. The engine runs. They die from carbon monoxide poisoning. The vans drive to the forests. The bodies are unloaded and buried. Chelmno is generally considered the first extermination camp in the operational sense, the first dedicated killing facility for Jews specifically. Between December 1941 and the spring of 1943, approximately 150,000 Jews are murdered at Chelmno. The gas vans are slow, unreliable, and have limited capacity. But the principle is established. Jews can be killed in large numbers by a small number of perpetrators in a way that removes the psychological burden of direct, close-range shooting. The next step is stationary gas chambers. January 20th, 1942. The Wannsee Conference, the Villa at Am Grossen Wannsee 56-58, a comfortable lakeside house on the outskirts of Berlin, is a conference center belonging to the SS. On the afternoon of January 20th, 1942, 14 men gather around a long table. They are joined by their host, Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the Reich Security Main Office, one of the most feared men in Germany, a tall, cold, brilliant administrator of murder. Also present, Adolf Eichmann, head of the SS Office for Jewish Affairs, who has prepared the logistical groundwork for the meeting and who later admits that he took notes in his own hand while the official stenographer recorded the minutes. The Wannsee Conference lasts 90 minutes. Then Heydrich, Eichmann, and the head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Müller, sit together by the fireplace and drink brandy. Heydrich is, by Eichmann's later account, uncharacteristically relaxed. He has reason to be satisfied. The meeting has formalized what is to be done with the Jews of Europe. The Wannsee Protocol, the official minutes of the meeting, drafted by Eichmann and edited by Heydrich, employs careful euphemisms throughout. There is no document in existence that uses the word murder or extermination in explicit terms. The language is evacuation to the east, special treatment, labor utilization. But every person in that room understood what the words meant. When Eichmann was tried in Jerusalem in 1961, he testified that the actual language used at the conference was far more direct than what appeared in the written record. They spoke, he said, in blunt terms, about what was to be done, about how, about who would be responsible. Heydrich announces that SS General Reinhard Heydrich himself has been designated by Hermann Göring as the plenipotentiary for the preparation of the final solution to the European Jewish question. This is a consolidation of authority. Heydrich is claiming central command of the entire operation. The various ministries represented at the table, Justice, Foreign Affairs, the Interior Administration of Occupied Poland, the Four-Year Plan Economic Authority, are being told clearly where the power lies. With Heydrich, ultimately with Himmler, and ultimately with Hitler, whose decision to move from persecution to annihilation historians believe was made, in broad terms, no later than the late summer or autumn of 1941, though the precise moment and nature of the order may never be known with certainty, since it appears to have been given orally. The document Eichmann circulates lists the Jewish populations of every European country, including those not yet under German control, like England, Ireland, Sweden, and even distant Turkey. The total is 11 million Jews. The problem of 11 million people is to be addressed through evacuation to the east and special treatment. Those who cannot work are to be treated appropriately. Those who can work will be worked until they cannot, and then treated appropriately. There is also discussion of the status of Mischlinge, the people of mixed Jewish and German ancestry, and of Jewish veterans who fought in the First World War, and of Jews in mixed marriages. These are difficult cases that challenge the racial categories. The discussion is legal and bureaucratic in tone. These men are not monsters, or rather, they are, but they are also lawyers and administrators, and they approach even mass murder with the professional terminology of their fields. This is precisely what makes them so dangerous and so important to understand. Heydrich's main purpose in convening the Wannsee Conference is not to make a new decision. The decision to murder the Jews of Europe has already been made, and mass killing is already underway in the Soviet Union, and gas vans are already operating at Chelmno. His purpose is to establish his own authority over the process, to ensure the cooperation and complicity of the various state agencies whose machinery will be required, and to coordinate the industrial-scale deportation and murder that is about to begin. The scholar Michael Birnbaum has observed that when the 15 men gathered at Wannsee, 4 out of every 5 Jews who would ultimately be murdered in the Holocaust were still alive. 15 months later, 4 out of every 5 were already dead. That is the speed at which the machinery, once fully assembled, operated. 1942. The death machine, in full operation, Operation Reinhard. The code name comes from Reinhard Heydrich, assassinated by a Czech parachutist in Prague on May 27, 1942, in one of the most significant and controversial resistance operations of the entire war, and one of the most brutally revenged. In reprisal for Heydrich's death, the Germans destroy the Czech village of Lidice completely, executing all the men, deporting the women and children to concentration camps, and razing every building to the ground. The village of Lizaki is similarly destroyed. Approximately 5,000 Czech Jews are deported to Auschwitz in reprisal. But Heydrich's death does not halt the operation that bears his name. It continues under the direction of Odilo Globoknik, SS and police leader of the Lublin district. The 3 extermination camps of Operation Reinhard, Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, are built in the forests of occupied Poland with a single purpose. They are not labor camps, not transit camps, not detention facilities. They are killing factories. Every Jew who arrives is to be killed. Within hours of arrival, in most cases. There is no selection process, no registration, no assignment to barracks. You step off the train, and within 2 hours you're dead. Belzec begins operations in March 1942. Sobibor begins in May 1942. Treblinka begins in July 1942. All 3 use carbon monoxide gas generated by diesel engines, piped into sealed chambers disguised, with careful, awful attention to psychological detail, as shower rooms or bathhouses, with fake shower heads on the ceiling, signs directing visitors to the showers, SS guards and Ukrainian auxiliaries offering reassurance that the process is routine. The person who designs and oversees the early operations of these camps is Christian Worth, a veteran of the T4 euthanasia program, who has been refining his methods of mass murder since 1939. Worth is brutal, hands-on, practical. His subordinates call him Christian the Terrible. He introduces the key operational innovation of the death camps, the deception. Keep the victims calm for as long as possible. Never allow them to understand what is about to happen until it is too late to resist. The efficiency of the killing machinery depends on compliance, and compliance depends on ignorance or disbelief. The tube, the fenced path from the undressing area to the gas chambers, is camouflaged with pine branches woven into the wire, so victims cannot see ahead of where they are walking. The Sonderkommando, the Jewish prisoner work brigades forced to maintain the killing process at the cost of their own lives, are instructed to tell new arrivals that they are going to shower and be disinfected before being assigned to work details in Ukraine. Some arrivals suspect the truth. The smell is wrong. The silence from those who went ahead is wrong. But the press of hundreds of bodies behind them, the guards with whips and dogs at their backs, and the sheer impossibility of believing the reality, all of these things override the warnings that whisper at the edge of consciousness. At Treblinka, which begins operations in late July 1942, the pace of killing is almost incomprehensible. The camp's first commandant, Fried Eberl, another T4 veteran, a psychiatrist turned mass murderer, is so eager to exceed the death rates of other camps that he accepts more transports than the camp can process. By August 1942, bodies are piling up faster than they can be disposed of. Transports are backed up on the tracks outside the camp. The dead and the not yet dead are left baking in sealed cattle cars in the summer heat. Eberl is removed from command in late August 1942 for incompetence. Not moral incompetence, but operational incompetence. He is replaced by Franz Stangl, who reorganizes Treblinka into a more efficient operation. Under Stangl, Treblinka's killing capacity increases dramatically. At its peak, between August and September 1942, the camp murders approximately 15,000 people per day. During the summer and autumn of 1942, more than 300,000 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto alone are transported to Treblinka in the operation known as Gross Action Warsaw. Between July 22 and September 21, 1942, a convoy of sealed cattle cars leaves the Umschlagplatz, the assembly point in the ghetto, virtually every day. Families are separated in the assembly. Children are torn from their mothers. The elderly collapse. Adam Cherniakow, the chairman of the Warsaw Judenrat, the Jewish council forced to administer the ghetto, is ordered to prepare deportation lists of 6,000 Jews per day. He submits the list for a while. When the Nazis demand that children from the orphanages be included in the deportations, Cherniakow understands with final, crushing clarity what resettlement to the east means. On July 23, 1942, he takes a cyanide capsule at his desk. He leaves behind a note. I am powerless. My heart trembles in sorrow and compassion. I can no longer bear all this. My act will show everyone the correct way to act. In the Lodz ghetto, Chaim Rumkowski's strategy of productive cooperation faces its most devastating test when the Germans demand the deportation of the ghetto's children and elderly in September 1942. Rumkowski delivers his infamous speech, "Give me your children," begging parents to surrender the most vulnerable so that the workers who keep the ghetto productive might survive. The speech is one of the most contested and agonizing documents in Holocaust history. Was Rumkowski a collaborator, a monster who sent children to their deaths to preserve his own power? Was he a pragmatist who believed, incorrectly, that sacrifice of some might save others? Was he simply a man whose mind had been broken by the impossible position he occupied? Historians argue. The children went to Chelmno. By the end of 1942, approximately 1.2 million Jews have been murdered in the Operation Reinhard camps alone. Treblinka, in the 15 months of its operation, will ultimately kill somewhere between 700,000 and 900,000 people, more than in any other single killing facility except Auschwitz-Birkenau. The ground at Treblinka trembles with the decomposing dead. When the site is excavated by forensic archaeologists decades later, they find human remains across the entire area. Teeth, bone fragments, personal objects, mixed into the soil to a depth of several meters. It is not a camp. It is a grave. Auschwitz-Birkenau, by 1942, has become something different from the original Auschwitz camp established in 1940 as a concentration and forced labor facility primarily for Polish political prisoners. Birkenau, Auschwitz II, is being constructed nearby as a massive combined concentration and extermination facility. The decision to use Zyklon B, the pesticide-derived hydrogen cyanide compound, for mass killing follows an experimental gassing of Soviet prisoners of war and sick Polish prisoners in Block 11 of Auschwitz in September 1941. Rudolf Haas, the commandant, notes approvingly that the method requires very little staff and produces less obvious distress in the perpetrators than mass shooting. It becomes the killing technology of choice for Auschwitz's gas chambers. 4 large crematoria with adjoining gas chambers are constructed at Birkenau, massive industrial structures with undressing rooms, gas chambers with dummy shower heads, and multi-muffle furnaces capable of incinerating thousands of bodies per day. The engineering company Toff and Sons of Erfurt proudly supplies and services the crematoria, filing patents for their furnace designs. The company boasts of over 60 years of experience with satisfied customers. The paperwork records technical specifications, fuel efficiency calculations, and capacity figures. This is the Holocaust as bureaucratic and industrial reality. Engineers optimizing incinerators, accountants calculating cost per unit, railway schedulers ensuring trains run on time. From 1942 onward, the trains come to Auschwitz-Birkenau from across Europe, from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. From Greece, 55,000 Sephardic Jews from Salonika, a community with roots going back to the expulsion from Spain in 1492, murdered in 1943. From Slovakia, from Norway, from Italy, after the German occupation of the Italian peninsula in September 1943. From Hungary. The Hungary deportations of 1944 deserve their own attention because they represent one of the most rapid mass murders in human history. In March 1944, Germany occupies Hungary, its formerly allied but increasingly unreliable partner. Adolf Eichmann travels to Budapest personally to oversee the deportations. Hungarian gendarmerie carry out the roundups with vigor and efficiency that sometimes exceeds even German expectations. Between May 15th and July 9th, 1944, 56 days, 437,000 Hungarian Jews are deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The daily transports carry 12,000 people in packed cattle cars. The Birkenau crematoria cannot cope with the rate of arrival. Bodies are burned in open pits alongside the crematoria. The ground saturates with human fat. The sky over Birkenau is filled with smoke visible for miles. At the peak of the Hungarian deportations, the selection process on the Judenramp, the railway platform at Birkenau, processes thousands per train in minutes. SS doctors, including the notorious Joseph Mengele, stand on the platform and direct new arrivals with a flick of the hand, right or left. Right means entry to the camp. Left means the gas chambers. Immediately, pregnant women are sent left. Mothers with children under 14 are sent left. The Germans have learned that separating mothers from small children causes enough protest and struggle to disrupt the smooth flow of people into the gas chambers. The logic of the killing machine requires that those who cannot walk alone to their deaths be accompanied by those who love them enough to refuse to leave. It is an observation about human nature turned into a policy of mass murder. Approximately 80% of those who arrive at Auschwitz-Birkenau go directly to the gas chambers without ever being registered as prisoners. They have no numbers tattooed on their arms. They leave almost no administrative trace. They are simply gone. The 20% who survive initial selection enter a camp system of extraordinary brutality, starvation, forced labor, disease, arbitrary execution, pseudo-medical experimentation. These are the ones who survive long enough to later testify about what they saw. Among those who testify, Primo Levi, an Italian Jewish chemist who survives Auschwitz by working in the chemical laboratory of the Buna synthetic rubber plant at Monowitz, Auschwitz's satellite camp. In his memoir, If This Is a Man, published in 1947 and later better known under the title Survival in Auschwitz, Levi describes with terrible precision what it means to have your name replaced by a number, your clothes replaced by a striped uniform, your past replaced by the single consuming reality of daily survival. He describes the Muselmann, the camp slang for those who had given up, whose eyes had gone empty, who had ceased to be capable of hope or resistance, and moved through the camp in a half-dead state until they died. He describes the small acts of human connection that made survival possible, a piece of bread, a word of encouragement, and the moral complexity of surviving in a system designed to destroy you. He wrestles for the rest of his life with the question of what survival means when so many did not survive. He dies in 1987, falling from a staircase in his Turin apartment, in what most who knew him believe was suicide. The camp, he once wrote, never really leaves. 1943 resistance and the desperate endgame by 1943. The people confined in the ghettos of occupied Poland have had enough time to understand with certainty what resettlement to the east means. The rumors have long since hardened into knowledge. testimony from escapees, from railway workers, from Poles who live near the camps, from the smoke that sometimes rises above forests where there are no factories. In the Warsaw Ghetto, what remains after the gross action of 1942, approximately 60,000 people out of a population that once numbered 460,000, is a remnant of those who had avoided deportation through labor exemptions, hiding, or luck. These survivors know they will be next. They have almost nothing, almost no weapons, no military training, no allies among the surrounding Polish population, though a small number of extraordinary Poles help at great personal risk. They have almost no realistic prospect of success in any conventional military sense. But they have something more fundamental, the decision that they will not go quietly, that history will record their choice. The Warsaw Ghetto uprising begins on April 19, 1943, the first night of Passover, the Jewish festival that commemorates liberation from slavery in Egypt. SS General Jürgen Stroop enters the ghetto with armored vehicles and nearly 2,000 troops to complete its liquidation. He expects a routine operation. Instead, he is met with gunfire from improvised firing positions. Molotov, the fighters of the Jewish Fighting Organization, the ZOB, led by 24-year-old Mordecai Anielewicz, and the Jewish Military Union have spent months obtaining weapons through the underground, building bunkers, preparing their positions. They have about 750 fighters. They have pistols, a small number of rifles, a machine gun, and grenades. They have no artillery, no tanks, no air support, no possibility of receiving reinforcements. For 27 days, the uprising continues. Stroop, surprised and humiliated, calls for reinforcements and systematically burns the ghetto block by block, building by building. He uses flamethrowers and artillery to destroy structures that Jews are defending from rooftops and windows. He pumps gas into the bunkers where fighters and civilians have taken shelter. Slowly, methodically, he reduces the ghetto to rubble. On May 8th, the command bunker at MIE 18 is discovered and gassed. Mordecai Anielewicz dies there, along with many of the ZOB's core leadership. A small number of fighters escape through the sewers, helped by a Polish underground operative named Kazimierz Ratajer, known as Kazik, who guides them to relative safety. Marek Edelman, one of the uprising survivors and later a renowned cardiologist and civic figure in Poland, said it simply: "We did not fight to win. We fought so that we did not die like rats in a trap. We fought so that history would record that we chose how to die." By May 16th, Stroop reports to Berlin, the Jewish quarter of Warsaw is no more. He blows up the Great Synagogue as a final symbolic gesture. More than 50,000 of the ghetto's remaining inhabitants are killed during the uprising or deported to Treblinka and Majdanek. The Warsaw Ghetto uprising is not the only act of armed resistance. The Białystok Ghetto uprising takes place in August 1943. The Vilna Ghetto uprising in September 1943. Revolts occur in the Sobibor extermination camp in October 1943. 300 prisoners escape, though most are recaptured and killed, and in the Treblinka extermination camp in August 1943, where prisoners set fire to the camp and approximately 300 escape. Fewer than 100 survive the war. The Sonderkommando revolt at Auschwitz-Birkenau on October 7, 1944, destroys crematorium, 4 with explosives smuggled in by female prisoners working in the munitions factory. Rosa Roboda and 3 of her co-conspirators are later hanged in front of the assembled prisoners as a warning. All 450 Sonderkommando who take part in the revolt are killed. These acts of resistance are militarily insignificant in the sense that they cannot change the outcome of the war or stop the killing. But they are morally and historically essential. They shatter the false narrative, still sometimes heard, that the Jews went like sheep to the slaughter. What actually happened is that the Jews of Europe resisted within whatever constraints their situation allowed, and their situation allowed almost nothing. They were surrounded, armed with next to nothing, betrayed in many cases by their neighbors, and in the most complete way possible abandoned by the world. The surprise is not that more Jews did not fight. The surprise is that anyone fought at all. Jewish partisan units operate in the forests of Belarus, Poland, and Lithuania. The Bielski brothers, Tuvia, Zuz, and Asel, build an extraordinary community of Jewish refugees and fighters in the forests of Belarus, ultimately protecting over 1,200 Jews, including children, elderly people, and families who could not fight. They survive by foraging, by raiding German supply lines, and by the sheer force of Tuvia Bielski's leadership. Their story is among the most remarkable in the entire history of the Holocaust. Meanwhile, the killing continues. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, the crematoria burn without pause. In the Baltic states, in Belarus, in Ukraine, the mass shootings continue. In 1943, Himmler orders a vast operation called Action Ernefest, Operation Harvest Festival, which in a single day, November 3, 1943, murders approximately 42,000 to 43,000 Jews from the labor camps around Lublin, Majdanek, Troniki, and Poniatowa. It is the single largest one-day mass murder in the entire Holocaust. The SS plays loud music through loudspeakers to drown out the sound of the shooting. Also in 1943, the Nazis begin the systematic destruction of evidence. As it becomes clear that the war is not going as planned, the Battle of Stalingrad ends in catastrophic German defeat in February 1943. SS leadership recognizes that the killing sites may eventually be examined by enemy forces. Paul Blobel, the SS officer who commanded the unit that carried out Babi Yar, is ordered to lead Sonderaction 1005, the exhumation and burning of mass graves across the occupied Soviet territory. At Babi Yar, prisoners are forced to dig up the bodies of the 33,771 killed in September 1941, stack them on improvised grids of railway rails, and burn them. The bone fragments that survive the fire are crushed with hammers and ground against stone. Then the pits are covered and the soil leveled. At Belzec, after the final gassing cease in December 1942, the entire camp is demolished. The gas chambers are torn down. The fences are removed. The ground is plowed. Trees are planted. A Ukrainian farmer is installed on the site. By spring 1943, no one passing by would guess what happened here. No one who passes here now is walking on ordinary ground. The ashes and bone dust of 434,500 human beings are mixed into the soil beneath them. 1944, the world watches, and mostly does not ACT. In 1944, two things happen in parallel that define one of the great moral failures of the Allied war effort. The killing accelerates. Hungary, for 137,000 Jews in 56 days. And the Allies, who by now know in considerable detail what is happening, largely decline to act to stop it. The Verba-Wetzler report is produced by two Auschwitz escapees, Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler, who break out of the camp in April 1944 and make their way to Slovakia, where they produce an extraordinarily detailed 60-page account of the camp's layout, operations, and killing capacity. The report includes the number of Jews killed, the method of murder, the physical structure of the crematoria. It reaches Swiss diplomats, the Vatican, the British and American governments, and Jewish organizations in Budapest. Before the Hungarian deportations, the Verba-Wetzler report is the most important intelligence document produced from inside the Holocaust. It arrives in the right hands at the right time to potentially save hundreds of thousands of lives. It is not acted upon in time. The Hungarian deportations proceed. The crematoria of Birkenau burn 50 Hungarian Jews per minute at peak operation. When Jewish leaders in Budapest finally convey the report's contents to Hungarian Regent Admiral Horthy, along with American and Allied threats of post-war accountability, he does halt the deportations in July 1944, saving approximately 200,000 Budapest Jews who survived the war. But this comes only after 437,000 have already been murdered. The question of whether the Allies could have bombed the rail lines to Auschwitz or the crematoria themselves is one of the great post-war controversies of the Holocaust. American bombers were flying missions over the Plosti oil fields in Romania in 1944, within range of Auschwitz. Reconnaissance photographs taken by the U.S. Air Force show the Birkenau crematoria in June and August 1944. The War Refugee Board, created by Roosevelt in January 1944, requests bombing of the rail lines. The request is declined by the War Department, which argues that the bombing would divert resources from the military campaign and might not be effective. Some historians argue that bombing could have saved tens of thousands of lives, at a minimum by disrupting the transport of Hungarian Jews. Others question its practical feasibility. The debate continues. What is not debated is that the Allied governments were informed, understood what was happening, and chose other priorities. The Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944 begin the campaign that will eventually end the Nazi Reich. But the end is not quick. The war in Western Europe is hard and bloody. In Eastern Europe, the Red Army's advance is faster in some areas but uneven. As German forces retreat and the front lines shift, the Nazis accelerate the killing rather than slow it down. Even as Germany faces military defeat on two fronts, the trains to Auschwitz continue to run. The ideological priority of murdering Jews sometimes takes explicit precedence over military logistics. Trains needed for troop movements are commandeered for deportations. The war and the Holocaust are not the same thing, and understanding them as separate but intertwined projects is essential to understanding how the killing continues even as the military situation deteriorates. In the final months of 1944, Himmler, recognizing that the war is lost and apparently hoping to negotiate a post-war role for himself with the Western Allies, orders the cessation of gassing at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The last gassing takes place on November 2nd or 3rd, 1944. The crematoria are then demolished. The Germans attempt to dismantle and conceal the evidence of what they have done. But the evidence is too vast, too saturated into the ground, too embedded in the memories of tens of thousands of survivors to be erased. In November 1944, the Sonderkommando who had been forced to operate the crematoria are being executed, one group after another. Before their deaths, some of them bury testimony. Zalman Gradowski, a Sonderkommando member, buries multiple manuscripts in the ground near Crematorium 3. One is recovered after the war in 1945. Another is found in 1962. In these manuscripts, buried in the earth that is itself a grave, Gradowski describes what he witnessed in the most intimate and devastating language. The last moments of families arriving at the undressing room, the sounds from inside the gas chamber, the work of removing the dead. He knows he will likely die. He buries his words so that they might survive him. I want future generations to know what happened here, he writes. Dear finder, search everywhere, in every inch of soil. Dozens of documents are buried under it, mine and those of other persons, which will shed light on everything that happened here. 1945 Liberation and the Reckoning January 17, 1945. SS guards began evacuating Auschwitz-Birkenau. Approximately 60,000 prisoners, the living remnants of a camp that has murdered over 1.1 million people, are marched out into the Polish winter. These are the death marches, columns of starving, emaciated prisoners in thin, striped uniforms marching through snow at gunpoint, those who cannot keep pace shot on the roadside or beaten to death. Some death marches last weeks. Some prisoners are marched 100, 150, 200 miles to other camps in Germany. Thousands die on the roads. Those who survive the marches arrive at camps like Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald, and Mauthausen, already catastrophically overcrowded, where they continue to die in thousands from starvation and disease. January 27, 1945. Soviet soldiers of the 1st Ukrainian Front approach the gates of Auschwitz. They do not know what they will find. What they find stops them in their tracks. 7,000 prisoners are still in the camp, those too sick to be marched. Around them are the ruins of the crematoria, deliberately demolished. Piles of belongings, 836 women's dresses, 370,000 men's suits, 44,000 pairs of shoes, 7.7 tons of human hair, shaved from the heads of incoming prisoners and baled for shipment to German textile factories. Mountains of confiscated glasses. Hundreds of thousands of suitcases with names and addresses painted on them. Luggage brought to Auschwitz by people who were told they would need it after the shower. The Soviet soldiers are combat veterans. They have seen many things. What they see at Auschwitz reduces many of them to silence or tears. The liberation of the camps is not an orderly or triumphant process. As Allied forces advance into Germany through the spring of 1945, they encounter camp after camp, concentration camps, forced labor camps, transit camps, in varying stages of abandonment, destruction, or ghastly operation. Buchenwald is liberated by American forces on April 11th, Dachau on April 29th, Bergen-Belsen by British forces on April 15th. Bergen-Belsen is perhaps the most comprehensively documented horror, partly because the British allowed journalists and documentary filmmakers to accompany them. What the film crews capture becomes some of the most important visual evidence of the Holocaust. The camp had not been built as an extermination camp. It began as a prisoner of war camp, then became a camp for Jewish exchange prisoners, then received massive transfers of prisoners from the East as the death marches emptied camps ahead of the Allied advance. In the final weeks before liberation, Bergen-Belsen was receiving thousands of prisoners per day, while the food supply had essentially ceased. When the British enter on April 15th, they find between 10,000 and 13,000 unburied corpses, 60,000 survivors, so weakened by starvation and disease that thousands continue to die after liberation despite the best efforts of British medical teams. And Frank is among those who died here, of typhus, in February or March 1945. She was 15 years old. The famous images from Bergen-Belsen, bulldozers pushing piles of emaciated corpses into mass graves, shocked the world. General Eisenhower, upon visiting Ohrdruf, a subcamp of Buchenwald, deliberately invites journalists, politicians, and dignitaries to see what has been found. "I want every American unit not actually in the front lines to see this place," he says. "We are told that the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for. Now, at least, he will know what he is fighting against." He cables Washington insisting that the evidence be documented thoroughly, fearing that people will not believe what happened. The evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable. And yet, it does not fully penetrate the consciousness of the world in 1945 in the way it should. The Nuremberg trials, which begin on November 20th, 1945, are the most comprehensive international legal proceeding in history up to that point. 22 major Nazi war criminals face trial before an international military tribunal composed of judges from the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. 12 are sentenced to death. Others receive prison sentences. The charges include crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, a category of law that is in important ways invented at Nuremberg, because nothing in the existing framework of international law adequately describes what the Nazis did. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe and one of the most powerful figures in the Third Reich, is convicted and sentenced to death. He poisons himself with a cyanide capsule the night before his scheduled execution, having obtained it through means that remain disputed. Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, is tried separately by a Polish tribunal, convicted, and hanged on April 16, 1947, at Auschwitz itself, on a gallows erected near the entrance to the crematorium he oversaw. He confesses to having overseen the murder of approximately 2.5 million people, though later scholarship suggests the actual figure is approximately 1.1 million. The discrepancy matters not in terms of moral weight, but in terms of historical precision. Most perpetrators are not tried. Most escape justice entirely. Adolf Eichmann flees to Argentina, lives there under a false name for over a decade, until Israeli intelligence agents abduct him in Buenos Aires in 1960 and bring him to Jerusalem for trial. He is found guilty of crimes against the Jewish people, crimes against humanity, and war crimes in 1961 and executed by hanging on June 1, 1962. His trial, covered by Hannah Arendt for The New Yorker, prompts Arendt's famous and controversial formulation of the banality of evil. The observation that Eichmann was not a monster or a sadist but a bureaucrat, a man of limited imagination and extraordinary capacity for self-deception, who had organized mass murder through the habits of obedience, diligence, and career ambition. The phrase has been disputed and defended for 60 years. But the observation it encapsulates, that genocide does not require monsters, only ordinary people willing to subordinate their moral judgment to institutional authority and ideological purpose, remains one of the most important insights the Holocaust yields. Many perpetrators simply disappear. Some assume new identities within Germany. Others flee through the Odessa network and similar escape routes to South America, Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, where communities of former Nazis provide sanctuary. Some are hunted for decades by Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal, who survives multiple concentration camps and dedicates his post-war life to the pursuit of justice. Some are found. Many are not. The survivors who remain in Europe find themselves in a shattered world. The Jewish communities of Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Belarus have been almost entirely annihilated. Of Poland's approximately 3.3 million Jews, approximately 90% are dead. In Lithuania, 95%. In the Netherlands, 75%. In Greece, 80%. In the Netherlands alone, 107,000 Jews are deported and murdered out of an original community of 140,000. European Jewry as a civilization has been destroyed. The Yiddish-speaking world, the vast, centuries-old culture of Eastern European Jewry, with its literature, its music, its distinctive way of life, has been erased from the map in the space of 3 years. The survivors who can leave, leave. Many emigrate to Palestine, where the State of Israel declares independence in May 1948. In part because the Holocaust has demonstrated with terrible finality that European Jews cannot rely on European nations for protection. Many others go to the United States, Canada, Australia, Latin America. They rebuild, somehow. They have children, grandchildren. Many do not speak of what they lived through for decades. The trauma is too enormous, the world too unwilling to hear. Primo Levi will write and testify for 40 years, and still die, as many believe, by his own hand. Elie Wiesel will become one of the great voices of conscience of the 20th century, and will describe for the rest of his long life the moment on the selection platform at Auschwitz, when his mother and his younger sister walked in a different direction and he never saw them again. What actually happened? The full picture. Let us now step back and look at the whole. We have traced the Holocaust from its bureaucratic origins in 1933 to the liberation of the camps in 1945, a period of 12 years. What emerges from this chronological overview that the simpler narrative, persecution, camps, 6 million dead, obscures? First, the Holocaust was a process, not an event. It did not begin with gas chambers. It began with definitions, with laws, with bureaucratic categories. The first step was to define who was a Jew. The second was to strip them of citizenship. The third was to expel them from economic and public life. The fourth was to physically isolate them in ghettos. The fifth was to shoot them in mass graves. The sixth was to gas them in extermination camps. Each step made the next step easier, both practically and psychologically. People who had already been legally defined as non-persons, stripped of citizenship, economically destroyed, and physically separated from the rest of society were easier to kill than people who had been your neighbors and colleagues until the day before. Second, the Holocaust required the participation, willing or otherwise, of an enormous number of ordinary people. The estimate historians give for the number of people directly involved in the killing process, as guards, camp staff, Einsatzgruppen members, and railway workers, runs into hundreds of thousands. Millions more participated indirectly. The civil servants who processed the paperwork, the judges who applied the laws, the business people who bought Aryanized property, the German citizens who reported their Jewish neighbors to the Gestapo, the soldiers who marched Jews to execution sites, the doctors who certified victims for the T4 program, the teachers who taught racial hatred to children, The engineers who designed crematoria, the railway workers who drove the deportation trains. None of these people, with a small number of exceptions, could claim they did not know what was happening. The deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto, 6,000 people per day for 2 months, took place in the middle of the city. The smoke from the crematoria at Auschwitz was visible for miles. The mass graves in Soviet Ukraine and the Baltic states were dug beside open roads. German soldiers posted home from the Eastern Front wrote letters describing what they had seen. Local populations heard the shooting, found the bodies, witnessed the transports. The Holocaust was not a secret operation. It was carried out in the open, with the knowledge and largely the acquiescence of the societies in which it occurred. Third, the world outside Germany knew and largely chose not to act. This is not a comfortable truth. The governments of Britain, the United States, and other allied nations had detailed intelligence about the deportations and killing operations from 1942 onward. The State Department in Washington received reports from diplomats in Switzerland who were in contact with Nazi officials seeking back-channel communications. The British intelligence service read intercepted German communications. Jewish organizations published reports and held press conferences. The Verba-Wetzler report reached Allied hands in 1944. The decision not to bomb the railway lines to Auschwitz, not to make the rescue of Jewish lives an explicit military priority, not to open immigration doors more widely. These were choices, not inevitable outcomes. They were made by governments that weighed competing interests and decided that Jewish lives were not important enough to change strategic calculations. Fourth, the perpetrators were not, for the most part, the psychopathic monsters of popular imagination. This is perhaps the most disturbing truth of all. Christopher Browning's research on Reserve Police Battalion 101, a unit of middle-aged German policemen who killed approximately 38,000 Jews in Poland in mass shootings between 1942 and 1943, demonstrates that these men were not ideologically indoctrinated fanatics. Many had joined the police before the Nazi takeover. They were given the option, at least once, of refusing the killing operations without penalty. Most chose not to refuse. Some expressed regret. Most did not. They drank heavily before and after executions. They helped each other psychologically. They normalized what they were doing through the ordinary human mechanisms of group conformity, peer pressure, bureaucratic routine, and the gradual escalation of moral compromise. Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments at Yale University in 1961, conducted precisely because Milgram wanted to understand how the Holocaust had been possible, found that 65% of ordinary Americans, when instructed by an authority figure, would administer what they believed to be severe and potentially lethal electric shocks to a screaming stranger. This is not a comforting result. It is not a result that permits us to locate the capacity for genocide exclusively among Germans of the 1930s and 1940s. It is a result that tells us something about human nature and about what authority and ideology can do to it. Fifth, the victims were not passive. The narrative of Jewish passivity in the face of the Holocaust is false and must be rejected. Jews resisted in the ways available to them, which were, given the constraints of total military occupation, extreme starvation, and physical isolation, extraordinarily limited. They resisted with weapons in the Warsaw Ghetto, in Sobibor, in Treblinka, in Auschwitz. They resisted by documenting what was happening. Ringelblum's archive, the Sonderkommando manuscripts, the testimony of Rudolf Roeder at Belzec. They resisted by maintaining cultural life, religious practice, and community bonds under conditions designed specifically to destroy them. They resisted by surviving, by escaping, by hiding, by helping others survive. Every one of these acts of resistance required extraordinary courage in conditions most of us cannot imagine. And sixth, the Holocaust did not end with the liberation of the camps. For the survivors, the Holocaust continued in its aftermath, in the post-war years of displaced persons camps, in the poverty and rootlessness of rebuilding lives without communities, families, or homes, in the decades of trauma that most survivors carried silently, in the suicides that claimed so many, including Primo Levi, Tadeusz Borowski, Jean Amory, Paul Celan. The dead leave no descendants. The living must carry the weight of being alive when so many are not. Why this matters now: the Holocaust is not a historical event in the sense that its lessons are sealed inside the past. The process by which it happened, the escalating definition of a group as subhuman, the legal framework for exclusion, the bureaucratic machinery of persecution, the closed borders that trap refugees, the silence of bystanders, the complicity of ordinary people in extraordinary crimes. These are not unique to Nazi Germany. The warning signs the Holocaust offers are not abstract. They are concrete, sequential, and specific. Identify the target group. Dehumanize them in language and propaganda. Enact legal discrimination. Physically separate and isolate them. Restrict their economic activity. Concentrate them in controllable spaces. And, at each stage, test the reaction of the population and the international community. If the reaction is silence or acquiescence, proceed to the next stage. This process has been repeated, not identically, but recognizably, in Cambodia in the 1970s, in Rwanda in 1994, in Bosnia in the early 1990s, in Darfur in the 2000s, and in other places where the machinery of genocide has ground into operation. The scale has varied. The methods have varied. The victims have varied. But the pattern repeats with horrible reliability. What breaks the pattern? Memory. Testimony. The refusal to be silent in the face of escalating persecution. The willingness of individuals and governments and societies to say, "This is happening, we see it, and we will act." These are not romantic ideals. They are the specific things that, time and again, have saved lives when the machinery has been assembled but not yet completed its work. Rudolf Verba, who escaped Auschwitz in April 1944, spent the rest of his long life angry, not just at the Germans, but at the Hungarian Jewish leadership that he believed delayed transmitting the Verba-Wetzler report, and at the Allied governments that received it and did not act quickly enough. He was asked once, in an interview late in his life, why he kept speaking about it, why he did not let it rest. He said something that stays with you. He said, "I did not escape so that I could forget. I escaped so that the world would know. If the world knows and does not act, that is a choice the world makes. But it cannot make that choice in ignorance. I will not allow ignorance as an excuse. We do not allow ignorance as an excuse. We have the documents. We have the testimony. We have the names, or as many names as have survived. We have the shoes, the suitcases, the numbered tattoos, the ashes. We have the words of Primo Levi and Elie Wiesel and Rudolf Verba and Marek Edelman and Simone Weil and countless others who carried the weight of memory for us so that we would not have to wonder what happened or whether it was real. It happened. It was real. 133,333 people per month for 45 months. That is the average killing rate of the Holocaust, if distributed evenly across its entire operational period. It was not evenly distributed. The killing accelerated and concentrated in 1942 and 1943. But the number gives the mind something to hold. 133,333 human beings per month. Men, women, elderly grandparents, children, infants. They had names. Most of those names are lost. The ones we have, we keep. Earth, do not cover my blood. Let there be no resting place for my outcry. That inscription stands at the memorial at Belzec, taken from the Book of Job, carved in a stone above the ashes of 434,500 people who were murdered in 9 months in a forest in southeastern Poland. The ground at Belzec is sacred. The ground at Treblinka is sacred. The ground at Babi Yar is sacred. The ground at Auschwitz-Birkenau is sacred, not in a supernatural sense, but in the sense that demands of us a particular quality of attention and remembrance. These places are not history behind glass. They are evidence of what human beings chose to do to other human beings within living memory. The last survivor who remembers will die. The last person who can say, "I was there," will go. And then it will fall entirely to the rest of us, to memory, to testimony, to documents and photographs and film, to hold what happened against the forces of time, denial, and deliberate forgetting. This is why we tell this story. Not once, not as a summary, not as a list of dates and numbers, but in full, in detail, with names and faces and particular moments, and the texture of real lives caught in the machinery of an ideological state. Because the story told in full, the story as it actually happened, is the only story that carries the full weight of its warning. The principal testimonies that inform this account include Rudolf Verba and Alfred Wetzler's 1944 Auschwitz Protocol, Rudolf Retter's memoir, Belzec, published in Krakow in 1946, the Wannsee Protocol, copy number 16 of 30, found by Robert Kempner in 1947 and used at Nuremberg, the testimonies gathered for the Nuremberg trials and their successors, Eichmann's trial testimony in Jerusalem, 1961, the works of historians Christopher Browning, Raoul Hilberg, Yitzhak Arad, Deborah Lipstadt, Timothy Snyder, and Richard Evans, the testimony collections of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, and the USC Shoah Foundation, and the primary accounts of survivors including Primo Levi, Elie Wiesel, Imre Kertész, and many others. Every specific figure, name, date, and detail in this script has been checked against at least 2 credible sources. Where figures are disputed among historians, as several are, particularly regarding precise death tolls at specific sites, the range of scholarly estimates has been noted rather than false precision asserted. This is a story that demands our attention and our seriousness. We are grateful to the survivors who gave testimony, to the historians who preserved and examined the evidence, and to you for watching and listening. If this story has moved you, challenged you, or changed the way you understand what happened in those 12 years between 1933 and 1945, then you already understand why this channel exists. History told at full depth is different from history told in headlines. The Holocaust told in all its stages, all its mechanics, all its individual human faces, is different from the Holocaust as a single terrible fact. Understanding how something actually happened, the choices, the escalations, the ordinary people, the missed opportunities, the moments where a different choice could have changed everything, is the only way understanding becomes more than information. It is the only way history becomes a living warning rather than a sealed monument. If you want more of this, if you believe these stories deserve this kind of attention, this kind of care, this kind of refusal to simplify, then subscribe to this channel. Every subscriber tells us that the work matters. Every comment tells us someone is listening. Every share puts one more person in front of the full weight of this history. We read every comment. We take every question seriously. If you have a story from this period you believe deserves its own documentary, a camp we haven't covered, a community that was destroyed, a person whose testimony has never been given the platform it deserves, tell us in the comments. The past refuses to stay quiet. Neither do we. Subscribe, and let's keep exploring history together. Not the history of dates and battles, but the history of decisions and consequences, of ordinary people and extraordinary choices, of how the world we live in came to be the way it is. Thank you for watching Inside Nazi Germany.